Rosa Martinez stood quietly at the edge of the crisis zone while the federal bomb squad deployed their sophisticated equipment around the suspicious device. At 34, she was the oldest technician on the city's disposal team, and her colleagues made sure she knew it. "Maybe you should coordinate from the command post," suggested team leader Johnson, his tone making it clear that the real work was for younger hands. Rosa had been hearing variations of this dismissal for months. Too old, too cautious, too reliant on outdated methods. What Johnson didn't know was that Rosa's outdated training came from her grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez, who had disarmed bombs for the resistance during World War II and had taught her secrets that weren't written in any modern manual. Today, when cutting-edge technology would fail them all, those ancient techniques would prove that sometimes the old ways were the only ways that worked. The emergency call had come in at 6:47 a.m. Suspicious package discovered in the basement of the Federal Reserve Building in downtown Phoenix. Initial analysis suggested a sophisticated device with potential nuclear components, triggering the highest level of federal response. Rosa arrived with the city bomb disposal unit, her grandfather's worn leather toolbox in hand. The same toolbox Miguel Rodriguez had carried through occupied France in 1943, through Korea in 1951, and through countless training exercises where he'd passed down techniques that had no names in official manuals. The federal team was already establishing a perimeter when Rosa approached the command post. Agent Sarah Collins, the FBI's lead coordinator, barely glanced up from her tablet display, showing real-time analysis from their mobile laboratory. "City personnel can assist with crowd control," Collins announced to the gathering team. "This is a federal matter requiring specialized expertise." Rosa opened her mouth to mention her 15 years of bomb disposal experience, then closed it. She'd learned that explaining her qualifications often made things worse, not better. Instead, she moved to where she could observe the device through the remote cameras. What she saw made her blood run cold. The device was housed in a steel briefcase with external wiring that formed a distinctive pattern. 3 parallel leads running to a central junction with a fourth wire that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. Rosa had seen this exact configuration before in her grandfather's training photographs from 1962. "Johnson," she approached her team leader quietly, "I need to take a closer look at the device." Team leader Johnson was busy coordinating with the federal agents, his attention focused on the impressive array of equipment they were deploying. "Martinez, we're in support mode here. Let the experts handle the technical stuff." "But that wiring pattern." "Rosa," Johnson interrupted, his voice carrying the patience of someone explaining the obvious. "These people have training and equipment we can only dream of. The best thing we can do is stay out of their way." Rosa watched through the monitors as the federal team prepared their computer-guided analysis system. The device looked deceptively simple, a metal briefcase with visible wiring and what appeared to be a digital timer counting down from 3 hours and 47 minutes. But Rosa recognized something the others missed. The fourth wire, the one that seemed purposeless, was positioned exactly where her grandfather had taught her to look for Soviet-era countermeasures. If she was right, any attempt to scan the device electronically would trigger a defensive protocol that would make disarmament exponentially more difficult. She tried once more. "Johnson, I really think—" "Rodriguez," Johnson said, deliberately using her grandfather's surname in a way that made it sound dismissive. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is real bomb disposal, not a training exercise." Rosa felt the familiar sting of being dismissed because of her age, her background, her reliance on techniques that couldn't be found in modern textbooks. She'd been the youngest person ever certified for bomb disposal in Phoenix, but that had been 8 years ago. Now she was viewed as past her prime, too set in old ways to adapt to new technology. She stepped back and watched the federal team work, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. "Mija, the bomb always tells you what it is, but only if you know how to listen. And sometimes the most dangerous bombs are the ones that look the simplest." Agent Collins positioned her team around the device with military precision. Her bomb disposal robot rolled forward, its mechanical arms extending sensors toward the briefcase. Rosa watched the live feed on the command center monitors, her unease growing with each passing second. "Beginning electronic signature analysis," announced technical specialist Davis, his fingers dancing across a tablet that controlled the robot's scanning equipment. "This baby can identify explosive compounds, trace detonation pathways, and map out disarmament sequences in real time." Rosa gripped her grandfather's toolbox tighter. Miguel had told her stories about bombs designed specifically to defeat electronic analysis. Devices built by Soviet engineers who assumed their enemies would rely on technology rather than human intuition. "I'm getting readings on the primary charge," Davis reported. "Looks like we're dealing with approximately 20 pounds of military-grade explosive. Timer shows 3 hours, 19 minutes remaining." "Can we disrupt the timing mechanism remotely?" Collins asked. "Working on it. The device appears to have multiple redundant systems, but our computer modeling should be able to—" The monitors suddenly erupted in static. "What just happened?" Collins snapped. Davis frantically worked his controls. "I've lost connection to the robot. All electronic systems are showing interference." Through the command center's reinforced windows, Rosa could see the bomb disposal robot had gone completely dark. Its lights were off, its mechanical arms had frozen in position, and the electronic displays on its chassis showed nothing but blank screens. "That's not possible," Davis muttered, running diagnostic checks on his equipment. "The robot has hardened electronics, military-grade shielding. There's no way a simple explosive device could generate enough electromagnetic interference to—" "It's not the explosive," Rosa said quietly, stepping closer to the monitors. "It's the fourth wire." Every head in the command center turned toward her. "The what?" Collins asked, her voice sharp with stress. Rosa pointed to the dead monitor that had been showing the robot's camera feed. "There's a fourth wire on the device that doesn't connect to the timer or the primary charge. It's an electromagnetic pulse generator, probably Soviet design from the early 1960s. My grandfather encountered similar devices during the Cold War. Agent Collins stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Your grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez. He disarmed bombs for 30 years, including several that were specifically designed to defeat electronic analysis. The command center fell silent except for the hum of non-functioning electronic equipment. Collins studied Rosa with calculating eyes, clearly reassessing the woman she'd dismissed as local support staff. Are you telling me this device just neutralized millions of dollars worth of federal bomb disposal equipment? Yes, Rosa replied simply. And if I'm right about the design, it gets worse. The EMP pulse was just the first layer of defense. The device will have secondary and tertiary countermeasures built in. Technical specialist Davis looked up from his tablet, frustration written across his face. This is impossible. Modern bomb disposal doesn't rely on Modern bomb disposal assumes the device was built by modern bomb makers, Rosa interrupted. But this wasn't. This is old school, Cold War engineering designed specifically to defeat the kind of technology we just deployed. Collins walked to the windows overlooking the device. The bomb disposal robot sat motionless, a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment reduced to an expensive paperweight. What are you suggesting, Martinez? Rodriguez, Rosa corrected automatically, and I'm suggesting that to disarm this device, we need to use techniques that predate electronic warfare. Manual analysis, mechanical disarmament, and a lot of knowledge about how Soviet engineers thought in 1962. Johnson stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. Rosa, I know you mean well, but... Johnson, Collins cut him off sharply. Your technician seems to be the only person here who understands what we're dealing with. I suggest you listen to her. Rosa felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the gravity of the situation. The timer on the device now showed 2 hours and 54 minutes, and they had no electronic means of analyzing or disarming it. I need to examine the device in person, Rosa said, with my grandfather's tools. Absolutely not, Johnson protested. Standard protocol requires. Standard protocol just got fried by a 60-year-old electromagnetic pulse, Collins interrupted. Ms. Rodriguez, what do you need? Rosa opened her grandfather's toolbox for the first time in front of the federal team. Inside were tools that looked ancient compared to the high-tech equipment surrounding them. Manual wire strippers, analog multimeters, mechanical timers, and instruments that had been handcrafted by Miguel Rodriguez himself. I need to get close enough to trace the wiring manually and identify the disarmament sequence, but I have to warn you, if I'm wrong about this device, getting close to it could trigger the primary charge. Collins looked at the dead robot, then at the countdown timer visible through the monitors that were still receiving feed from the building's security cameras. How confident are you in your assessment? Rosa thought about her grandfather's lessons, about the countless hours he'd spent teaching her to read the language of explosives and electronics. Confident enough to bet my life on it? The question is whether you're willing to bet 200,000 lives on my grandfather's training. 20 minutes later, Rosa stood in the basement of the Federal Reserve Building, facing the device that had stumped the most advanced bomb disposal technology in the world. Her grandfather's toolbox sat open beside her, its worn contents looking impossibly primitive in the sterile environment. "Command, this is Rodriguez," she spoke into her headset. "Beginning manual analysis of the device." Agent Collins's voice crackled back. "Copy that. What do you see?" Rosa knelt beside the briefcase, her trained eyes tracing the visible wiring. Up close, the craftsmanship was evident. This device had been built by someone who understood both explosives and electronics at a master level. "The timer mechanism is definitely secondary," she reported. "The real trigger is hidden beneath the false bottom of the case. This is a classic Soviet design from the early 60s. They called it a Matryoshka bomb because of the nested systems." She carefully opened her grandfather's toolbox and withdrew a tool that looked like a modified screwdriver. Miguel had crafted it himself in 1963, specifically for dealing with Soviet electronic countermeasures. "Rodriguez, be advised the timer now shows 2 hours, 31 minutes, Collins reported. "Copy that." Rosa began the delicate process of tracing the fourth wire, the one that had generated the electromagnetic pulse. Her grandfather's voice guided her movements. "Never trust the obvious wire, Mia. The real danger is always hidden." Using her analog multimeter, Rosa tested the electrical flow through the device. The readings confirmed her suspicions. The visible timer was a decoy. The actual detonation sequence was controlled by a separate, hidden mechanism. "Command, I need to open the false bottom of the case. This is going to expose the primary trigger mechanism." "Negative," Johnson's voice cut through the comm system. "That's too dangerous. We should evacuate and call in a nuclear disposal team." "There's no time," Rosa replied, already positioning her tools. "A nuclear team would need 6 hours minimum to analyze and respond. We have 2.5. She carefully inserted her grandfather's custom tool into the seam of the briefcase's false bottom. The mechanism clicked open with a sound that had remained unchanged for 60 years. What Rosa saw inside made her breath catch. The primary detonation system was more complex than she'd anticipated. Not just a bomb, but a radiological dispersal device designed to spread nuclear material across a wide area. "Command, we have a problem. This isn't just an explosive device. It's a dirty bomb designed to contaminate approximately 50 square miles of downtown Phoenix." The silence that followed lasted several seconds. "Rodriguez." Colin's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Can you disarm it?" Rosa studied the nested mechanisms, comparing them to the mental blueprints her grandfather had drilled into her memory. The device was elegant in its lethality. Multiple redundant systems, each designed to defeat a different type of disarmament attempt. "Yes," she said finally, "but it requires techniques that aren't in any modern manual." Rosa's hands moved with practiced precision as she began the most delicate operation of her career. The radiological dispersal mechanism was a masterpiece of deadly engineering. 3 separate trigger systems, each designed to activate if the others were tampered with incorrectly. Command, I'm beginning the disarmament sequence. The device has 3 nested trigger mechanisms. I need to neutralize them in a specific order, or any one of them will detonate the primary charge. How do you know the correct sequence? Collins asked. Because my grandfather disarmed an identical device in Berlin in 1963. Soviet engineers only had one template for this type of weapon. They were too paranoid to innovate once they found something that worked. Rosa withdrew a tool from her grandfather's collection that looked like a modified pair of needle-nose pliers. Miguel had bent and shaped them himself, creating precisely the right angles needed to access Soviet-era trigger mechanisms without activating their defensive protocols. Timer shows 1 hour, 47 minutes, Collins reported. Rosa began with the primary trigger, a spring-loaded mechanism that would fire if the case was moved more than 6 inches in any direction. Using her grandfather's pliers, she carefully disengaged the motion sensor, her movements so subtle they would have been invisible to electronic monitoring. First trigger neutralized, she reported, allowing herself a small breath of relief. The second trigger was more complex, a pressure-sensitive system that would detonate if the internal atmospheric pressure changed by more than 2%. This required a technique Miguel had learned from a captured Soviet engineer, creating a sealed bypass that maintained pressure while disabling the sensor. Rosa used a tool that looked like a modified syringe, creating a microscopic vent that would prevent pressure buildup without triggering the sensor. It was delicate work that required absolute steadiness. Any tremor in her hands would mean instant detonation. Second trigger neutralized. The third trigger was the most dangerous of all, a chemical sensor designed to detect the metallic compounds found in modern bomb disposal equipment. It was the reason the device had been built with an electromagnetic pulse generator in the first place, to force disarmament attempts to use precisely the kind of electronic equipment that would trigger this final fail-safe. But Rosa's grandfather's tools contained no modern metals. They had been crafted from materials that predated the chemical signatures the sensor was designed to detect. Beginning work on the chemical trigger, Rosa announced, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. This was the moment that would determine whether Miguel Rodriguez's 30 years of experience had been enough to save a modern city from nuclear catastrophe. Rosa's hands moved with practiced precision as she began the most delicate operation of her career. The radiological dispersal mechanism was a masterpiece of deadly engineering. 3 separate trigger systems, each designed to activate if the others were tampered with incorrectly. Command, I'm beginning the disarmament sequence. The device has 3 nested trigger mechanisms. I need to neutralize them in a specific order, or any one of them will detonate the primary charge. How do you know the correct sequence? Collins asked. Because my grandfather disarmed an identical device in Berlin in 1963, Soviet engineers only had one template for this type of weapon. They were too paranoid to innovate once they found something that worked. Rosa withdrew a tool from her grandfather's collection that looked like a modified pair of needle-nose pliers. Miguel had bent and shaped them himself, creating precisely the right angles needed to access Soviet-era trigger mechanisms without activating their defensive protocols. Timer shows 1 hour, 47 minutes, Collins reported. Rosa began with the primary trigger, a spring-loaded mechanism that would fire if the case was moved more than 6 inches in any direction. Using her grandfather's pliers, she carefully disengaged the motion sensor, her movements so subtle they would have been invisible to electronic monitoring. First trigger neutralized, she reported, allowing herself a small breath of relief. The second trigger was more complex, a pressure-sensitive system that would detonate if the internal atmospheric pressure changed by more than 2%. This required a technique Miguel had learned from a captured Soviet engineer, creating a sealed bypass that maintained pressure while disabling the sensor. Rosa used a tool that looked like a modified syringe, creating a microscopic vent that would prevent pressure buildup without triggering the sensor. It was delicate work that required absolute steadiness. Any tremor in her hands would mean instant detonation. Second trigger neutralized. The third trigger was the most dangerous of all, a chemical sensor designed to detect the metallic compounds found in modern bomb disposal equipment. It was the reason the device had been built with an electromagnetic pulse generator in the first place, to force disarmament attempts to use precisely the kind of electronic equipment that would trigger this final failsafe. But Rosa's grandfather's tools contained no modern metals. They had been crafted from materials that predated the chemical signatures the sensor was designed to detect. Beginning work on the chemical trigger, Rosa announced, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. This was the moment that would determine whether Miguel Rodriguez's 30 years of experience had been enough to save a modern city from nuclear catastrophe. Rosa's story reminds us that experience and wisdom can't be replaced by technology, and sometimes the most advanced solution is the oldest one. If you were Rosa, would you have insisted on using your grandfather's methods or trusted the modern equipment? Let us know in the comments. If this story inspired you to respect experience and listen to all voices regardless of age, smash that like button and subscribe for daily inspiring stories. Don't forget to share your thoughts below. We read every comment. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.